Hello and welcome to Red's Business and Technology Podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Barnes.
I'm your co-host, Brad Ferris.
And today we're sitting down with an absolute expert in the cybersecurity field, Chris Polkinghorne, whose most recent title was Head of Security at Swyftx, but has 2 decades of experience in the industry. So looking forward to getting some quality insights into cybersecurity from this episode. Chris, thanks for joining us, mate. Did you want to start with your background rolling way back to 20 years ago?
Yeah, sure. It's great to be here. I started at, I don't know what got me interested in security. I think it was when a friend of mine hacked into my computer and made my CD drive eject over ICQ back in the mid-90s.
ICQ.
Something like that. So
there we go.
Made me want to know how he did that. So I went trying to figure it out, and, you know, that was a good introduction. But I went to uni after that, and I had to... I'm sure I'm like past any liability, whatever it's called. You know.
Statute of liabilities.
Statute of liabilities. This is like the start of 2000. So I got in a bit of trouble for sort of hacking into all these computers. Not like proper hacking. Like you know, we used to get like 50 megabytes of internet quota, and we figured out a way how to sort of connect into everyone's systems and borrow their quota. So we, my friends and I, were sort of, you know, did that to about 1,000 students, and so you know, we had unlimited. But so then I had to write a bit of a letter, and you know, that sort of said, write a letter to the uni saying, please don't kick me out. I'm a good boy.
How'd they catch you?
Well, there was like you know, this other guy in IT. He in one of the other this is on the colleges, I should say. He said he caught me by looking at the logs, but I think someone just told him that it was.
Look at the logs in the 90s.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. There's nothing overly technical there, no CSI stuff. So, and then look, after that, I can't have been too bad because I went from there and then I went into defence intelligence. I had to go through all the security clearances, so they said it wasn't too bad. So, you know, I made it through uni. I made it through that, and then I sort of hopped around a few places.
Starting in IT, or did you go straight into cyber?
I was in security from day one at Defence Signals Directorate, now ASD. That was a lot of fun, a lot of awesome people. Nice and cold in Canberra, and you know, I think we set a record. We had an indoor cricket team in Canberra, and we set a record for the biggest defeat ever we lost.
Biggest defeat.
Yeah. The other team scored 200 and something, and we got negative 50.
Was that the IT team? Was it?
Yeah,
they lost. Wow.
So our graduate intake was absolute athletes.
Only the best.
Lethal weapons.
Yeah, good, very good with the tech. Not good at anything else. So and then I moved back to Brisbane, took a few different roles, contracted a bit. I did a good long time at Melbourne IT, Web Central, I think it was back then, and sort of changed its name a few times. And then went to Accenture, and then came to Swyftx, and then that's finished up, and now I'm figuring out what I'm going to do next. So I'm sort of, my current mantra is I just say yes to everything, every conversation. So that's why I'm here.
Like coming on this podcast, yeah.
Exactly. Brad reached out, and we did a director's course together, and I said, that sounds really cool. Let's have a chat.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Beauty. So Swyftx, what did you do there? What was your title, and what were you in charge of?
And maybe just for those who don't know what it is, like what they do.
Swyftx is a cryptocurrency trading platform, in the news quite a bit at the moment, so definitely check that out. But you know, it was a rapid scale up place. I think while I was there, we went from 80 people to about 330 over the space of 12 and a bit months. So it's just
crazy.
It was just frenetic pace.
Yep.
You know, customers went from low hundreds of thousands to 6, 7, 800,000. So it was just rampant pace. Really, really good. Just hiring every week, 3 people coming in. It was awesome. I absolutely loved it.
Yep.
So I was the head of security there, sort of building out the security program, protecting the customers, sort of defending against, crypto is a pretty hostile place, a lot of attackers. And so building out those programs that protected the customers, it was a lot of fun. Loved it.
So how big was the team there when you first started?
The security
team?
The security team was there was 2 people plus myself, and then we sort of quickly ratcheted that up to in the 20s.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was pretty. We sort of built it out across a couple of streams. There was quite a big focus on the internal sort of security operations side. You call it like the SOC. We call it cyber defense. Focus on like assurance, offensive application security, all the areas. It was a lot of fun. All did it in 6 months. That process.
So in that industry, in the crypto space, I mean, crypto's in the news a lot lately. Like, was it a higher? What am I trying to say? Was it a bigger target for threat actors because it's crypto?
Pretty much, because there's just such a bad guy who can pull off an attack. They're so directly connected with profitability. Like once it hits, if they can exit that money, and hit their wallet, very, very difficult to recover from.
Yeah, right.
Whereas if you look at like attacks on the against the regular banking, like there is methods to claw back funds. You can pause and slow things down. So there is avenues for recovery there. It's still a lot of attacks in that space.
So crypto's like a quite high value target, and you can get in, get out, and kind of leave no trace.
High value. I remember seeing some stats on it that like a single, looking at like the value of a compromised account across all these different services, and I think like a PayPal account might be worth $80, on these dark web forums and whatnot, and like a account with any of the big major banks might be worth $40, something like that. A Netflix account's worth like $6. Credit cards the same. Like it's all pretty low because there's a lot of mechanisms in place to stop attackers monetizing those things to really impede them. The crypto space, I think, on the data I saw was it was about $400 to $500 per account. So, it meant that anywhere where there's money to be made, attackers are experts at monetization of it, and they really farm it out. And you would end up with, attacker groups who specialise in the phishing aspect, in pulling in leads, and then you end up with attackers who are experts at taking those sort of warm leads and then compromising their accounts, and then that feeds into this machine. The people who are experts at acquiring those accounts and then pulling the funds out.
I guess
we've put in a lot of things to stop that happening. We had a big fraud team, a lot of systems in place to stop it. But it was a very it's just a dangerous landscape. All of those. So.
I'm envisioning in my mind like a zombie movie. You're like top of this big mountain, and there's all these zombies like trying to come up, and all these threat actors you're trying to whack away. You would have seen it all, I'd say, from a cybersecurity point of view in 20 years, and then at a big crypto exchange. Were they the biggest in Australia, Swyftx?
Yeah. There's one other, but it's hard to know who's the biggest. But I think we were certainly the most prevalent. Advertising on NRL everywhere you're looking on the back of the heat and everything. So it was awesome being a part of it.
Awesome. So from your time there, what was some of your biggest achievements at Swyftx?
Well, we got sort of building out the program for one. That was great fun to do. Building out a security capability that was like linked in with the products getting produced. Like if you look at a lot of security operations, they inherently get linked with just IT, and trying to break it out of IT and drive it into the actual product, the thing that creates value for the business is I think you're inherently linked to much more value. So you're going to end up with a bigger, more impactful program. So being able to do that was really good. Getting ISO 27001, we went from start to finish on that in, I think, 4 months, something along those lines. Like most people probably take 2 years, but we were always pretty fast there. And that we were able to do it because we had a big team and big buy-in in the business. Really security's was paramount, with woven throughout the company. So that's why we were able to do things quick. That's some of the big ones.
What are some of the lessons you learned from your time at Swyftx? No doubt you get an attack from all sides, building a big team, getting ISO 27001. What are some lessons you learned in that time?
It's probably about following the data. Like fundamentally, your job is to protect and understand the business. So it's to the focus on what we used to call situational awareness. So if once again, that's about driving security out of just being laptop defense, email defense, and driving it into the product. So if you could deeply understand where the business is trying to get to, what the data is, what the customers, how they want to interact, and what their demands are, then I think if you focus on that, that would be a lesson for me. If I was starting it all again tomorrow, that's where I would immediately start. Is one, understanding those, gaining that really deep situational awareness, and really focusing on where every bit of data is in the business.
That's really good advice, and that's something that we try and practice as well here. Is that when we have cyber conversations with businesses, we start with what data do you have that's important to protect, and where is it now? And that's where you want to protect first, right? So that's some good advice. What did the cybersecurity industry look like 20 years ago compared to now?
I remember your first job is like. I was like pulling RAM out of servers and stuff like that. We were selling assets, so that was like my very first security job in defence.
Why were you pulling RAM out?
Oh, when you're recycling assets, so defence would get worried. There would be a standard, big standard on how to do it, secure disposal, and it's no hard drives, no memory. So that's what it looked like. And that's based off of breaches. I'm sure that incident happened, and so now everyone had to check that. So, but I'd say what you used to see is security's job was to install like antivirus on someone's laptop, and that was now you were secure. Yep. And
just a password and an antivirus tool. That's cybersecurity 20 years ago.
Definitely. There was identity in concept. I mean, it was just Active Directory or something like that. That was your identity.
Yep.
And interestingly enough, I would say that there's probably still the number one attack back there is compromised credentials, and the number one attack, for really significant attacks is compromised credentials now. So I think not much has changed there. Antivirus has just evolved. You've got super powerful agents now. I don't really get into all the shortenings and acronyms. I don't keep up with XDRs and all whatever the heck all it means. It's
a lot of DRs.
It's all the same stuff. Just really powerful agents that can consume a lot of intel. Coming locally from the boxes. It's going to do a much better job than looking for signs and signatures. So I think security was probably fundamentally an IT problem.
Yep.
It was just a tech thing. Even probably going back maybe 12 years, something like that. Just throughout the early 2000s, I think security was just a tech problem, and then now it's breaking out a lot, and it's fundamentally driven by risk, driven by data security, driven by you're seeing privacy coming under the banner of security, and I think Australia's probably a fair bit behind on the privacy stakes compared to some of the EU, UK, their GDPRs, and even the US, so I think that's where we'll see big change here.
So looking across your career, long career in security, when you approach a new company or a new business and you're looking at their cybersecurity strategy, is that influenced by the type of business? And again, we're probably harping on about this because it is crypto, and that's usually what people, when it's a ransomware, like pay us in Bitcoin or pay us in some kind of crypto. So across your career, when you're setting a security strategy, is that influenced, like how much does the type of industry or the type of business and the kind of inherent risks or security risks affect the way you approach security? Like, is it a one size fits all, or do there's a heightened risk in this industry, so we've got to do things a little bit differently? How does that play out?
I reckon every security program, if you boil it down enough, it comes down to like the really basic elements of just plan, do, check, act. Like that's sort of at the core of like the ISO 27001 standard. There's different ways to do it and whatever, but fundamentally it's plan for something. Come up with a plan. So think ahead what you need to do. Look at your risks, do all that stuff. Then actually do something, make them better. Put some things in place. Check that they're actually working. And then if you find any issues out of your checking, act, and then the cycle just repeats. So you can sort of boil that program down, and then regardless of the size of your business, you could apply that concept. And then,
I guess your budget to attack those things is different from a 50-person business versus a crypto exchange, right?
Totally. And that the variable on that is the risk. So if you've got a risk program that says the cost of an issue, that's going to influence how you address those elements, the planning, checking, doing, and acting. That's what's going to change there. So, and that's based upon the loss to the business, the loss to the clients, and then you get variables coming in there, which is like the the government increasing the fines that can be imposed on a business for being negligent in your cybersecurity duties. So like that's changes the risk equation right there. It might have been a $2 million fine, and now it can be up to $50 million.
Yep.
Let alone that's without even touching the brand damage, which can be company ending.
Yeah.
So when you're at Swyftx, I imagine you would have had a lot of experience with this around building the team, saying I need this new hire, I need this new tool, for example, and probably even prior to that, you would have to go to the CFO and you say you need these things around cybersecurity. How did you articulate the risk back to the people who have the purse strings to get what you needed to build out this large cybersecurity team?
We understood risk pretty well. I spent a lot of time sort of being able to describe what that looks like. And there's different methods. We tried out a few, and some things worked better than others. But fundamentally, if you can show someone that this is a very severe risk, we think that it can lead to this event. We think that this is the likelihood of that event occurring, and then you can go through and talk about. Do we want to decrease the likelihood? Do we want to make that occur less? Do we want to decrease the size of the event? And that helps then inform the selection of what you do there, because you can make it as complicated as you want. And if you're big, really mature businesses, they have immense risk management practices and very complex. I'm not a specialist in that space. I like sort of keep things really simple. That's all risk is an equation of is. The something bad happening, and the likelihood of that bad thing happening, and then out of there you talk it through and you discuss what do we want to get it to, how do we get it down to a level we're all comfortable with, and then how much does it cost to do that, and then you can sort of represent a return on investment equation, and that's the general approach. So that's what we applied.
That's really good advice, actually. Focusing on just the likelihood of this happening if we don't put this tool in place, for example, and what's the impact that's mitigated if we do put this tool in place, and really just have that conversation. So that's really good advice. I think you can break it down, and if you're in the IT team and you're responsible for cyber and you have this really technical conversation with CFOs and stuff trying to get money out of them, they're going to go, what are you talking about? But focusing just on what's the likelihood of this, us getting breached, for example, and what's the impact, or what's this tool going to do to the impact if we put it in place or don't put it in place. That's some really good advice.
People overcomplicate it.
Yeah.
Keep it simple. People. But different companies works different size. Smaller business, a nice chart, nice quadrants. Up the top, very top corner is the really bad stuff. Down the very bottom left corner is the not so bad. And your job is to try and get less things. Keep it pointing down.
Yep.
That's what you want to do.
So there's been a lot of large-scale breaches in Australia. Optus Medibank and those kind of things. It's been feels like in the media that Australian businesses, large and small, have been under consistent attack. In your words, you've been in the industry for 20 years, cybersecurity, which is a lot longer than everyone else. I feel like a lot of people in that sector now, but definitely 20 years ago, we were in a small market for cybersecurity experts. What do you think is going on?
Yeah, I remember I did some reading on it, and I don't know if there's more events. What I think's happening, I think it's actually a bit of a feedback loop. There is more attacks because now the media is covering them more, and the attackers are using the media's coverage to monetize. So they're leveraging the coverage. They're leveraging the government's increasing fines. They're leveraging all of these things to then drive more attacks to make more money, and the feedback loop continues. It's so there probably is more attacks that are happening. Every week I get someone messages about some new attack. I sit in a couple of security groups, and you sort of hear what's going on. I saw there was one in the news a couple of weeks ago about a school in Brisbane. Something happened, and I'm like, that would never be in the media. Go back a couple of years, that stuff, that event, it's unfortunate, very bad that it's occurred. And these, the people who experience these attacks, they are victims of crime, which that's a really important point to focus on. But like that event would never make it to news headline to the front of the ABC News, So, and the attackers are definitely leveraging this. I think we need to really change the narrative on it and focus on that. If you experience these breaches, like you are a victim of a crime.
Yeah.
It's not. We run to who's at fault? These guys there. You're negligent. I'm like, well, not necessarily.
I think you're definitely right that because there's been so much media, people are probably playing on it. And there has been breaches for years, and people in the IT industry know that there has been breaches, right? It's just that I think mainstream now media, they're sick of talking about COVID, so they got to get something else. But there's probably a good thing, and I've had conversations with heads of IT who are actually trying to capitalize on that. So that the fear with the people who hold up the economical buyer, that kind of person who before wouldn't have put budget towards cybersecurity, they go, no, there's all these breaches, the awareness is up, and actually the IT managers are trying to capitalize on that, which is probably a good thing that people are more aware. But the industry is definitely going out of control. What are some interesting attacks that you've seen recently?
I remember seeing some attacks that you get like recruiters trying to talk to people, and they would be attackers in disguise. I remember hearing about people applying for. This didn't happen to Swyftx. This is stuff that this one I've heard about. People applying for jobs and being sort of insider agents. And I think there's a whole world of discussion that you can go into there.
So trying to breach the human element, like kind of get behind all the controls.
Yeah. Like I think the remote work has opened this up into where, and there's documented evidence of this happening. Like these sort of very prolific attacker groups applying for jobs in tech firms to get insider agents in there, purely remote workers, and they pass the technical interviews through they just get skilled up at it, and they're experts at passing these interviews because, and then you've got even now like some of these sort of AI systems. It's going to be very interesting how they start to change the remote tech interviews thing. You might end up hiring someone who never actually existed. It might be a robot. Awesome world. That's a whole tangent to go down. Yeah. I think we're seeing some attacks that are really starting to change their barriers of entry. Like there's attacks on cars, like attacks on satellite systems. It could be anything. So.
I mean, on the flip side, do you think, again, being in the industry for so long, do you think as a business culture, if you like, has been a bit lackluster around security, and maybe not taking it as serious as they should have up until it's got kind of exposure in the media? Yeah,
I definitely think so, and I think it relates back to security was born out of IT, and everyone's just happy that it's happy there, it's doing its job until it isn't. And then, it becomes the number one thing that everyone wants to talk about. And, the CEO wants a daily update and all these things. But, before that, you couldn't get the time with them to do their job. And, that probably resonates with quite a few groups. I think as security moves into, the task is to make a resilient business that's resilient against attacks and bad things happening.
Yep.
You can start to show a lot more value to the business. I think everyone can probably thank the poor brothers and sisters at Optus and Medibank for unlocking that budget and probably unlocking access to the board.
Yep.
I agree. Boards and CFOs are the two big changes. They're getting really cyber conscious and asking internally a lot of questions. There's a lot of frameworks out there. 27001, like you mentioned earlier. There's the ASD Essential 8. There's NIST and all these frameworks. What's your advice to businesses about what framework should I pick to align to? Because it's hard to do all of them. Take a long time, right? What process would you go through to pick the right framework to align to?
The stuff like the ASD, the Essential 8, that'll make you pretty resilient against the most number of attacks that they see in Australia. I quite like that. I think anything which is making you resilient against phishing and helps protect your identity and your endpoints, you've probably covered a lot of the most common attacks right there for most businesses. Doesn't mean you're impervious, but you're probably a lot better than your neighbour who hasn't applied those things. I like ISO 27001 because it's a more holistic one. It doesn't get down to the specifics, the too detailed of how to implement everything. It's more just describes at a high level. It's that plan, do, check, act cycle, right? It describes how to do that and the things that should be in place to sort of show that you've got a program that has management support and it has longevity. That's what it's trying to establish. Is this isn't just a single photograph of your security program. This is a series of that this is going to lead to a long-lasting program that's going to protect your customers and your business. I've used the sort of NIST CSF a lot, the Cybersecurity Framework. It's really good. I'm a big fan of it. It's pretty broad. It's detailed enough. Covers a lot of domains, and I feel as though if you can respond to a lot of them, even at the most basic level, you've probably got the foundations of a pretty good business right there.
So if you were internal in a business right now, and I know you do some consulting work as well, what criteria would you go through to select what frameworks? Because if you had that big one, right, and being Swyftx, 27001 makes perfect sense, right? But say you're a smaller business, you might more align to not just on the time to go through the process, right? Something else. What criteria would you go through to advise a business on what framework?
It would depend upon the risks. That's where you start, is like understanding the risks in which you operate, and what's the sort of regulatory landscape in which you work. Are you providing critical infrastructure? Well, there's guidance and standards. Are your financial services? Well, there's some APRA stuff that you can use there.
So if the risk is larger, you would go more towards NIST or more towards 27001? How does that work?
I would, if you were getting things going, I would grab NIST CSF. Anyone can get that, public document, and just have a read. It's not that big. It's got a reasonable amount, and if you can, some areas you can just completely remove. I think if you pick that, you're going to be, you're coming from a pretty good base.
So you talked earlier when you were going through some of the stuff you did at Swyftx around creating an offensive program, so not just looking at the internal protecting our data and how people get in, but also building an offensive program. Can you explain a bit more about that and how would businesses start an offensive program?
I'll tell you what an offensive program is. Talk about when you might need it and how you might use it. So an offensive program, like people would have heard of it like in penetration testing, and the concept would be how you take that and then build it into your more daily, weekly, monthly routines. And its purpose is to give just continuous assurance that you are primed and ready for when the bad guys come knocking. So one of the things you do in that program is you think about, well, what are our threats? What tactics do they use? What tooling? How do they operate? These bad actor groups, and then you go and model that, and you say, well, this group is, just pick an easy one, like phishing. This is the techniques they use, and they use this sort of phishing mechanisms, and then you go and test your organisation against it. So you actually do the attack in a nice way, not in a naughty way. So you do the attack, and then out of that, that out of our 100 people in the company, we were able to get 10% credentials, or whatever your figure may be, or you target your admins, and we were able to get one admin's creds from your moderate level of complexity phishing attack, and then you can use that to build that through. Okay, well we're at the very front door from phishing, we're at this level. And then you might keep pushing that program through. You might then say, okay, well, let's say we've tested the hypothesis that you can phish one of our admin. And then you go onto their desktop, or you spin up a corporate device, which anyone would get. And then you go and see, well, what can we do from here? You test and say, well, we run, whatever vendor, XDR, EDR, whatever, and you test that it's actually going to do its job. And so you could get your sort of good guy attacker to write some code, which once again mirrors what those attacker groups do, their techniques and tooling, and test, well, how resilient are we against that sort of attack? And it's actually like you can do this stuff. It sounds really complex, and like a lot of big companies would do this, but I don't think it's that unreachable for a lot of companies. If you've got really keen techies, like you could do sort of like hackathons around this, like a fun sort of engagement. Give people 48 hours and say, let's hack the business. Let's see what we can do. Here's a bunch of pizzas. Here's some cartons of beer. Go at it. And like it'd be a really great engagement. And if you've got really keen techies, like they've all got that inner security person in them. Like that hat is they definitely wear it all the time. And they'll come up with like phishing attacks, and they'll come up with like these things called, like, we call them lol bins or something, living off the land, like they're malware, but it runs and consumes the capabilities locally on the machine to perform its jobs, and so they could write that, and next thing you know, you've now got the beginnings of a fledgling offensive program, and you're away.
It's kind of interesting. We talked about this last week, how you were mentioning, kind of on the flip side to that, or part of that offensive program then is, or maybe it's the defensive program, is how would you respond to an event? So just sit there and go, this has happened. Now business, go. What would you do once you've identified, once the offenders are in and they're doing something, so the nice offenders, okay, now the other team defend. What would you do?
Absolutely, and that's the crucial bit. That's how you really link it to the return on investment. There its job is to make the business more resilient. So you've tested yourself against this attack, but throughout the whole thing, you've got an internal security program. It doesn't matter if there's not like some 24/7 SOC or anything like that. Anywhere, any business has some level of a security program. You then take the elements, the artifacts that are generated by the offensive tests, and you see, well, what did we see? What did we see from the phishing? Did our email system, did it pick anything up? How can we make it better to detect these sort of phishing attacks? And then underlying that's the human element as well. How do we make our staff more resilient? How do we we give them a bit of training? That's pretty good. Give them more testing.
That's interesting. When you said offense, I thought you were meaning attack back to hackers. Is what I thought you're going. Not attack internally as
back the hackers.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were doing. But
you've got to be careful with that. That's it's a bit illegal.
Yeah,
But one key takeaway from what you just said is you're probably right. People think it's really complicated, and I've got an offensive cyber program. But what you're saying, you can do some pretty simple things to get some pretty high value results.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can go and get people publish their playbooks for this sort of thing on how to do it. You can go on GitHub right now and download someone's quite well built out red teaming program and see and run it. It's not like it's actual code. It's instructions.
Yep.
How to execute this sort of attack against your own business. It costs you $0. It costs you time and a six pack, like whatever.
How many businesses are actually doing that? That'd be quite low.
Like, I guess in your opinion,
I think pretty low.
Yeah.
Like the big end of town, you definitely see it. There's a really awesome like Google series on it where they talk about how they do it internally. It's really, really fascinating.
When you say a Google series,
it's on YouTube. They made like this is how sort of the Google security program works. It's really right. I watched it with my wife to sort of show her this is what I do for a job.
And she was awake.
Did she make it through?
No, she was into it for a bit, but it's a really great way to watch that. Like people should send that around to their their board of directors and say their C levels and say this is right. Google's worth a lot of money. You can take it in concept. You don't have to do the specifics. They talk about an attack they did there. I really wanted to do this at the Swyftx. We were starting to think about how we were going to do it. Like Google did this attack where they got a USB powered spark globe. You touch them and the little lightning bolt.
Oh, I've always wanted one of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid.
So their red team got one of these, and then they got it's called like a rubber ducky, right? Like it's a little you can go online, this website Hack5. You can download all these hacker products. You can buy all these hacker products, and it's a programmable keyboard. And so they got the electric USB globe. They built in this keyboard, and they had it. So as soon as you plug it in.
Your virtual keyboard?
No. So it's a physical keyboard in concept.
Okay.
Like the computer, you plug it into your device, and your computer goes, "Oh, that's just a keyboard." Then it just starts typing at 10,000 characters a second, and all you see is a screen pop up and disappear. And now, from plugging in that device, that little funny little globe, it's now completely taken over your system.
Wow.
So it's gone online, it's downloaded, it's binaries, it's pulled and it's executing on your local host, or it's pulled out, it's pulled every ounce of data out of it. So Google talks about how they did that attack. I was so keen to execute it, I just ran out of time.
That's really cool. I've heard of people dropping off USBs in reception desks and see having to get plugged in, which happens all the time. I've never heard of one of those zappy light bulbs to drop it off somewhere.
It's the exact same. It's the exact same concept. All they're trying to do is give people a reason to plug it in.
Something into their computer, yep.
Everyone's probably across don't plug the USB drives in. Yeah. But I don't think people would realise that, you can do anything with a USB. You go on the Hack5 website now, you can get an iPhone charging cable that you plug it into your iPhone. It's actually got built into it like a Wi-Fi connection and a remote keyboard, and then I could sit in the car park and send remote commands. I'd have a remote keyboard onto your system.
Through the cable?
Yeah, it costs $90, right?
Don't get any ideas, Barnesy.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, so
scary.
That sort of stuff's fun to do. You do it part of your hackathon. You go spend a couple $100 on these cool things, and you start to teach people about what's possible. Like, if people know what's possible, they can defend against it.
I think those things make it tangible, right? Like you said, I think people think that they spend tons of money on programs, and you need to spend some money. But yeah, if you just kind of be a bit creative with it, get a few little cheap tools, as you said, buy some beer, buy a pizza, whatever, a bit of time invested, and off you go. And that makes it real, like it's tangible. People have actually experienced that, so they'll remember. Yeah, okay, I plugged that thing in, and things got a bit crazy. So.
If you could provide some security tips for personal people, so interesting tips through all your years of experience and all the crazy stuff you've seen, what are the top kind of 3 or 4 things you'd recommend?
Look, I always try and imagine how I protect my elderly parents from getting hacked. They're my benchmark.
Your litmus test, yeah.
Yeah. So it's probably a bit controversial, but I would absolutely support writing down your passwords in a little book if you're my 60-something-year-old parents, because it's probably going to be more secure than however they whatever they're doing on their systems.
In a spreadsheet or a Word document or something on the desktop.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like it's not great practice. You won't win any awards for that, but it's about protecting them. Look, a big one is to use, I recommend this to anyone, use a Chromebook. They are so resilient to attack. Most people, if you look at what they're actually using their system for, they log in, they open a web browser. That's the only thing their system ever does. So that device is basically, that's its whole purpose, and it just runs web browsers in secure sandboxes. So it is very difficult for an attacker to take over the system. It isn't perfect. It's very good.
Are you saying business use or students or elderly, or
you could apply it to anything? Like if you had a customer service operation, that would be a really easy way to protect a lot of that space. And the Google ecosphere, they're getting better at the sort of enterprise space. There's some good stuff there, they have managed Chrome browsers, stuff like that. Office 365 space has the same going now. Their sort of Defender products they're really good. That's really high level. And use an iPhone as well. Apple protects their ecosystem way better than Android. But I use
and they're enhancing that. And they're enhancing that again, I believe. Right? I think the Apple just released they're putting some next level encryption in place shortly.
They're really good on privacy. They're really good on secure. They fundamentally they protect their ecosystem. They don't let in as much rubbish as Android lets in. It doesn't make it perfect, but they're pretty good. They do a bit more scrutiny on what comes in the App Store.
Yeah. I've definitely heard that from businesses that we work with that try and get apps on the App Store, and it's a big process, which is a good thing. You want that to be a big process, right?
The last thing is the religion that everyone needs to get on board is just put MFA, multi-factor, 2-factor, whatever. Put it on just everything. It should be coded.
Just accept that it's way of life. Don't complain. You're going to spend an extra 10 seconds to log into something.
Yeah.
I feel that tide is changing. I know probably a year ago in my role with our clients, it was always the more senior people, which are the ones who are actually probably the more risky people to not have it, because they've got the keys to all the different systems. There was a lot. There was a lot of resistance. If I'm honest, I don't want that on my machine. But now everyone's kind of it's changing.
can-
It's being accepted.
You can tie it back like that. The question earlier about some of the attacks. Like if you look at the Uber breach, that was one of the things they executed there was basically like an MFA flood attack.
Yep.
They just spammed some poor person and called them up in the middle of the night and said, "Hey, I'm from IT. If you just hit accept and that MFA prompt will go away." And someone's going, "Oh, yeah, okay." Now they've just logged into their VPN, the attacker. So definitely to try and move, like, let's say for your home, you're unlikely to be targeted with that at home. But for a business, to move away from the just the prompt ones, that is me. It takes you about, if you use like the Office 365, like the Azure.
So don't use the Authenticator app.
No, the numbers are really good
Yep.
because what you're doing is you're adding deliberate friction to the MFA process where people ran too quick to. We need to make it so seamless that our 62-year-old CEO can use it.
Yep.
Hence the hitting yes and it goes in, right?
Exactly. And so now we need to add in a tiny bit of friction to make it a bit more resilient. And so like the ones where you type in the code, awesome. The ones where you got to match a code up with what's on the screen, very, very good. Those are great things.
Do you have an opinion on the authentication cadence, if you like? You know how you can set it to 14 days or 30 days or whatever?
Is that for how long it keeps you logged in?
Yeah, that one. Sorry, yep.
It all comes down to like what the system is. Like if it's, you're...
Like Office 365 is the classic one, right? So everyone's got that.
Yeah. People's, like, email's just the center of your life now. I think we probably let that, so much of your identity is tied back to if someone can get in your emails, that probably compromised your entire life. Like some of those systems you probably need to be a little bit more strict on and say, you should have to log into this a little bit more frequently. That's probably something. I'm probably not so great at that at home. I'm definitely not, but I'm not sure.
Hey, thanks, Chris, for coming in. Really appreciate the insights you've given for personal users and some interesting ones like Google Chromebooks and also your experience and what frameworks to align to, mate. So really appreciate it. Anything else you want to add before we close out?
No, that's about it. It's been great in here chatting with you. I don't know what I'm going to do now.
You got to meet your accountants, don't you?
I do have to talk to my accountant.
Update your personal passwords, mate.
I have to do that.
Yeah.
Yep. No, it's great. No, thanks for having me. It was really, really good fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for coming in.